His fingers skimmed the curve of my waist, his touch sending a wave of heat that settled deep inside me. I could feel his breath on my skin, warm and steady, as his lips trailed down my neck. With every kiss, every gentle tug at my dress, I felt the walls I had built around myself start to crumble. My body responded before my mind could catch up, leaning into him, craving the closeness I had been fighting. When his hand slid under the fabric, I knew there was no turning back. This is my story. Sophia had always thought of James as just a colleague. He was smart, professional, and always impeccably dressed. But they had never been more than people who exchanged a few pleasantries in the office. That all changed when they were sent to Paris for a business trip. It was a last-minute decision, and neither of them was thrilled about it. But the idea of a few days away from the office in one of the most romantic cities in the world was impossible to ignore. When they arrived in Paris, the atmosphere was electric. The city's ancient buildings, the smell of fresh croissants in the air, and the busy streets full of life made everything feel different. They checked into their hotel, a beautiful old building near the Seine River, and were immediately caught in the whirlwind of meetings, presentations, and negotiations. But amid the chaos of business, something unexpected happened. During a quiet moment in their hotel room, the tension between them shifted. Sophia noticed how close James stood as he explained a point on their agenda. The closeness felt different, charged, as if something was brewing between them. They both ignored the feeling, chalking it up to the stress of the trip, but deep down, neither could deny it. The next morning, Sophia couldn't focus during their breakfast meeting. She kept stealing glances at James. He was smiling, laughing, and yet something was different about the way he looked at her. The intensity in his eyes seemed to linger a little too long. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself that it was just a moment of weakness brought on by the excitement of being in Paris. But deep inside, she knew that something had shifted between them. As they walked through the cobbled streets of Paris, heading to their next meeting, James was closer than ever. He would casually brush against her arm or laugh at something she said, and it all felt too intimate. Every touch, every glance seemed to hold a deeper meaning that neither of them wanted to confront. Sophia's heart raced every time he was near, and she caught herself wondering if he felt it too. She had been taught to keep things professional, to never mix business with pleasure, but the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. She had never been more tempted to cross a line, to do something reckless. The evening brought a surprise. After a long day of meetings, their team decided to take a break and enjoy some local sights. James suggested they visit the Eiffel Tower, and Sophia, feeling both exhausted and strangely alive, agreed. The tower loomed in front of them, its lights twinkling against the dark sky. They stood silently together, watching the beauty of the city unfold beneath them, their breaths visible in the chilly night air. Standing side by side, neither spoke. The quiet between them seemed to pulse with the weight of everything they hadn't said. Finally, it was James who broke the silence. "You know, I never thought Paris would be like this. It's not just the city, it's the people, the atmosphere." His voice was softer than usual, more personal. Sophia glanced at him, feeling a flicker of something deep inside. "Yeah," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "It's almost like the city makes everything feel
impossible. She was about to turn away to laugh it off when James suddenly reached out and gently touched her arm. The electric charge between them was undeniable. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the whole world seemed to disappear. It was as if their hidden desires had come to the surface, and neither knew how to stop it. The next morning, things felt different. The lingering tension from the night before had not gone away. If anything, it had only grown stronger. Their meetings continued, but now there was an unspoken connection between them, a dangerous energy that neither could ignore. They would catch each other's gaze a little too long, and even simple conversations felt like a flirtation they could not fully control. After a particularly intense meeting, they found themselves alone in the hotel's lobby, the soft hum of the city outside barely audible. James was standing close to her again, his face just inches from hers. "Sophia," he murmured, his voice low. "I can't stop thinking about last night. Can you?" For a split second, everything froze. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had spent the night trying to forget, but it was impossible.
The attraction she felt for him was real, and the thought of rejecting it seemed unbearable. "No," she whispered back, barely believing the words. Before she could think any further, James leaned in and kissed her, softly at first, then with more urgency, as if he, too, had been waiting for this moment. The kiss lingered between them, leaving both of them breathless and confused. They pulled away quickly, as if what they had just done was a mistake. James stepped back first, his face pale and eyes wide with disbelief. "We shouldn't have done that," he said, his voice strained. This was wrong." But even as he said the words, there was a flicker of longing in his eyes, something that suggested he didn't fully believe it. Sophia, too, was torn. She had always prided herself on keeping control, on making sensible decisions. But in that moment, everything felt out of her hands. She nodded silently, not knowing how to express the mess of emotions swirling within her. They didn't speak for the rest of the day. Meetings were awkward, and even their team seemed to notice the strange distance between them. When they returned to the hotel that evening, they both retreated to their separate rooms, the weight of the kiss hanging heavily between them. Sophia tossed and turned in her bed, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Had she just ruined everything? Was it possible to go back to being just colleagues after this? Days passed, but neither Sophia nor James could escape the pull they felt toward each other. They tried to act like nothing had happened, but it was impossible. Every time they shared a brief moment together, there was that lingering electricity between them, a reminder of the forbidden attraction they could not ignore. The meetings were still important, but now the business seemed secondary to the overwhelming tension between them. One afternoon, during a break in their schedule, Sophia and James found themselves walking together through the narrow streets of Paris. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining brightly, but the warmth of the weather only seemed to emphasize the coldness between them. James finally broke the silence, his voice tentative. "Sophia, I've been thinking about what happened, and I can't pretend it didn't change things." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying to avoid this conversation, but now it was unavoidable. "I know," she said quietly, "but we can't do this. We both know what's at stake." James stopped walking, turning to face her. I don't care about what's at stake, he said, his voice low but determined. I care about you. Sophia's heart raced at James's confession. She felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting, leaving her with an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. She had never been one to take risks, especially when it came to her career, but there was something in James's eyes, something raw and sincere, that made her question everything. James, we can't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. We can't risk everything for a moment of weakness. He stepped closer to her, his presence magnetic. I don't care about the risk anymore. I've never felt this way about anyone, and I can't walk away from it. His words were soft but firm, a plea she wasn't sure how to answer. Sophia took a step back, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. Her professional life, her reputation, it all felt like it could be torn apart by a single wrong move. But as she looked at him, she couldn't deny the pull that had only grown stronger since they arrived in Paris. Could she ignore it, or would she give in to the temptation? After a long silence, Sophia exhaled slowly, as if coming to terms with a decision she knew deep down she couldn't avoid. Maybe we don't have to decide now, she said quietly. Let's just see where this goes. But no matter what happens, we have to be careful. No one can know about this. James nodded, relief flooding his expression. I'll be careful, Sophia. I promise. But I won't back down. And with that, the unspoken agreement was made. The line between professional and personal had already blurred beyond repair, and now there was no going back. The days that followed were a strange mixture of normalcy and growing tension. The meetings continued, the business never stopped, but every moment spent in each other's company felt like a forbidden game they were both playing. James would find subtle ways to brush against her, his fingers lightly grazing hers during presentations or when handing over documents. And Sophia, despite every instinct telling her to stay composed, began to savor these moments, to look forward to the next touch, the next shared glance. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of negotiations, they found themselves alone in the hotel bar. The air was thick with unspoken words, but neither of them could bring themselves to break the silence. James leaned in, his voice low and intimate. Sophia, I know we're playing with fire here, but it's too late to turn back. I need you to know that I'm serious about this. I'm not just I'm not just looking for a fling. Sophia met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. I know, she said softly. I feel the same way. But even as the words left her mouth, a part of her questioned whether they were making a mistake. Was it possible to have something real between them? Or was this just the heat of the moment, the intoxicating pull of a city like Paris? But then, as James reached across the table to take her hand, she couldn't deny the spark that ignited between them. The connection was undeniable, and the world outside of their bubble seemed to fade away. It happened on their last night in Paris. The business trip was officially over, and they had one final dinner to attend, a celebration of their success. But the moment they stepped into the restaurant, Sophia could feel the tension between her and James. It was as if the entire evening had been leading up to this point, to this inevitable moment where they would finally give in to everything they had been hiding. As the evening wore on, the tension became almost unbearable. Their conversations were filled with double meanings, their glances too long, too intimate. Finally, after dinner, when the others had retired for the night, Sophia and James found themselves walking back to the hotel, alone in the quiet streets of Paris. The city, which had once seemed full of possibilities, now felt like a private world just for them. They stopped outside the hotel entrance, both of them breathing heavily, as if unsure what would happen next. Then, without a word, James cupped her face in his hands, pulling her closer, and kissed her. It was a kiss that felt like the culmination of everything they had held back. There was no hesitation this time, no uncertainty, just passion, raw and unrestrained. Sophia kissed him back, feeling the heat of his body pressed against hers, the world falling away around them. For that moment, there was no office, no career, no rules, only the two of them. The line they had been walking had finally been crossed, and neither of them knew what would happen next. The next morning was a blur. They had barely slept, the events of the night before still fresh and undeniable between them. Sophia woke up with a sinking feeling in her stomach, the weight of their actions slowly settling in. What did this mean? What had they done? She didn't regret the kiss, but the consequences were impossible to ignore. She had crossed a line with James, no longer just a colleague, but something more. But what exactly was it? When they met for breakfast, neither of them spoke at first. The silence between them was thick, heavy, with the unspoken tension of what had transpired. Finally, James broke the silence, his voice quieter than usual. Sophia, last night, I didn't want to complicate things, but I don't want you to think I regret it. He paused, searching for the right words. I just don't want this to be a one-time thing. I don't want it to be about just Paris. I want to see where this could go, back home, wherever that may be. Sophia's heart raced at his words. She had known this was coming, but hearing it out loud made it all too real. She had to make a choice now, and the weight of that decision pressed down on her chest. I don't know if I can do this, she admitted softly. I don't know if I can risk everything for something that might not even last. James's expression softened, his gaze sincere. I'm not asking you to risk everything. I'm asking for a chance to see if we can make this work. We don't have to have all the answers now, but I don't want to walk away without at least trying. Sophia closed her eyes, the decision weighing heavily on her. Maybe she wasn't ready to throw everything away, but maybe, just maybe, it was worth the risk. Sophia's mind raced as the days passed. Back in the office, everything seemed to return to normal, or at least it tried to. They went through the motions of work, pretending that the events of Paris hadn't happened. But there was a shift between them, an undercurrent of something more. It was in the way they looked at each other, the moments where their hands brushed, where the weight of their shared secret hung in the air like a heavy fog. The more Sophia thought about it, the clearer it became. She couldn't stop thinking about James, the way he made her feel alive, the way his presence seemed to fill the spaces around her. She had tried to push him away, to convince herself that it was just a fling, but deep down she knew it was more than that. It wasn't just the passion, the forbidden allure of their time in Paris. It was the connection, the real, raw connection that they shared. For the first time in a long time, Sophia began to wonder if this was what she had been waiting for. Was this the kind of love she had been searching for, even if it came with risks, with uncertainty? She didn't know the answer, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't ready to let go of James just yet. Sophia finally made up her mind. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but sometimes the things worth fighting for weren't. She found James in the office one afternoon, sitting at his desk, his back turned to her. She walked over, her heart pounding. When he turned to face her, she didn't hesitate. James, I've been thinking about us, about what happened in Paris, and I know it's complicated, but I can't keep pretending like it didn't change everything. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. Sophia, if you're saying that we should stop. No, she interrupted, shaking her head. I'm saying we should give this a chance, whatever this is. I'm not ready to let it go. James's face softened, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. I've been waiting for you to say that, he murmured. We'll figure it out. Together. And in that moment, Sophia knew that despite the risks, despite the challenges ahead, they had chosen each other.